Explain this. His voice was low, controlled, but the tension in the room was palpable. He slammed the photograph down on the kitchen table, the sound echoing through the otherwise silent house. She froze, her hand halfway to the coffee cup she'd been about to pick up. Her eyes flicked to the photo, and her stomach dropped. There she was, smiling, her boss's arm draped casually around her shoulders. The background was unmistakable, the upscale hotel bar from her business trip last week. Her business trip. The one she'd told him was just another routine work obligation. The one she'd assured him was nothing more than long meetings and boring dinners. Jake, she started, her voice trembling. Don't. He cut her off, his tone sharp, his eyes blazing. Don't even start with whatever excuse you've got lined up. Just tell me the truth. For once. Her mind raced, scrambling for words, for anything that might soften the blow. But there was no softening this. The photo was damning, and the look on his face told her he wasn't going to let this go. How did you even get that? She asked, stalling, her voice barely above a whisper. Does it matter? He shot back, his jaw tightening. What matters is what's in it. What matters is that you lied to me. She flinched at the accusation, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She had lied. She'd lied by omission, by deflection, by pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But she hadn't intended for it to go this far. She hadn't intended for him to find out like this. But now he had. 2 weeks earlier, she'd been packing for the trip, folding blouses and skirts into her suitcase while Jake sat on the bed, watching her with that quiet, unreadable expression he'd had more often lately. You sure you don't want me to come with you? He'd asked, his voice casual, but there was an undercurrent of something else, worry, maybe. Insecurity. She'd laughed, brushing it off. It's just a work thing, Jake. You'd be bored out of your mind. Besides, it's not like I'm going alone. There's a whole team going. He'd nodded, but his eyes had lingered on her for a moment too long, as if he were trying to read her, to see if there was something she wasn't saying. There was. The truth was, she hadn't been looking forward to the trip. Not at first. The late nights, the endless meetings, the pressure to perform, it was exhausting. But then there was her boss, Mark. Charismatic, confident, and always just a little too close for comfort. She'd noticed the way he looked at her, the way his hand would linger on her shoulder when he spoke to her. She'd noticed, and she hadn't stopped him. Because it felt nice. Because it was flattering. Because, somewhere along the way, she'd started to wonder if maybe she deserved more than what she had at home. The first night of the trip, they'd all gone out for drinks. It was supposed to be a team bonding thing, but as the night wore on, the group had thinned out until it was just her and Mark, sitting at the bar, their chairs angled toward each other. You're different, he'd said, his voice soft, his eyes locking onto hers. I've noticed it for a while now. There's something about you, something that sets you apart from the rest. She'd laughed, brushing off the compliment, but deep down, it had stirred something in her. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Come on, he'd said, leaning in closer, his breath warm against her ear. Let's get out of here. She'd hesitated, but only for a moment. And then she'd followed him. The next morning, she'd woken up in his hotel room, the memories of the night before flooding back in sharp, vivid detail. She'd felt a pang of guilt, but it had been fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the thrill of it all. She'd told herself it was just a one-time thing, a mistake she wouldn't repeat. But then it happened again the next night. And the night after that. By the time she'd returned home, she'd been a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, excitement, fear, longing. She'd tried to push it all down, to pretend like nothing had changed. But something had changed. And now, standing in the kitchen with that photograph in front of her, she couldn't hide it anymore. Jake, I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I never meant for this to happen. Then why did it? He demanded, his voice rising. Why did you let it go this far? Why did you lie to me? She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain it? How could she make him understand something she didn't even fully understand herself? I don't know, she admitted finally, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know why I did it. I got caught up in it. And then I didn't know how to stop. He stared at her, his expression a mixture of anger and hurt. Do you have any idea what this does to me? What it does to us? She did. She knew it was a betrayal, a breach of trust that couldn't be easily repaired. But she also knew that she didn't want to lose him. That, despite everything, she still loved him. Jake, please, she pleaded, reaching out to him. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I want to fix this. I want to make it right. He looked at her hand, then back up at her, his eyes hard. How? How do you fix something like this? She didn't have an answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. She could see the pain in his eyes, the way it twisted his features, and it tore at her heart. I need some time, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. I can't do this right now. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Okay. Whatever you need. He turned away from her, his shoulders tense, and walked out of the kitchen. She watched him go, her chest aching with a mixture of regret and fear. And then she was alone, standing in the kitchen with the photograph still lying on the table, a stark reminder of the choices she'd made and the consequences she now had to face. Jake. Her voice was barely a whisper, but she knew it didn't matter. He was already gone. And so was the life they'd built together. But that wasn't the end of it. Just the beginning. Because after Jake left, after the initial shock wore off, she was left with a decision to make. A choice that would define the rest of her life. She could try to fix what was broken, to fight for the man she loved and the life they'd built together. Or she could walk away, start over, and hope that she could find happiness somewhere else. But right now, all she could do was stand there, staring at the photograph, and wonder how things had gone so wrong. And whether she could ever make them right again. What do I do? She whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling. But there was no one to answer. Chapter 2. The silence in the room was deafening, pressing down on her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. She stared at the photo still clutched in Jake's hand, the one that had shattered their world. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of confusion and guilt, but something gnawed at her, something she couldn't quite place. The way the photo was taken, the angle, the timing. It all felt off. Too perfect. Almost staged. Her breath caught. Staged. The word echoed in her mind, slipping into place like a missing puzzle piece. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. Jake, wait, she called out, but he was already at the door, his back rigid with anger. He didn't turn. His voice was cold, detached. I've heard enough. No, you haven't, she said, her voice rising, desperation clawing at her throat. Something's not right. That photo, it's not what you think. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, but he didn't look at her. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't move. She stepped closer, her words tumbling out in a rush. I was at the bar with Mark, yes, but it wasn't like that. We were talking about work, about the trip. That's all. Someone took that photo and made it look like something it wasn't. Someone is trying to sabotage us. Finally, he turned, his dark eyes piercing hers. Sabotage? His voice was laced with skepticism, but there was a flicker of something else, doubt, maybe curiosity. Who would do that? And why? She hesitated, her mind racing. I don't know, she admitted, her voice softer now. But I swear, Jake, I'm telling you the truth. That photo was staged. I didn't cheat on you. He studied her, his gaze searching, and for a moment, she thought she saw a crack in the armor, a glimmer of the man she loved. But then his jaw tightened, and he shook his head. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you lied to me. You stayed with him, alone, in a hotel. You didn't tell me. That says enough. She swallowed hard, her heart sinking. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. I should have been honest with you. But I didn't do anything wrong. Please, just, let me prove it to you. He looked away, his expression unreadable. I need time to think, he said quietly, and before she could respond, he opened the door and walked out, leaving her alone once again. She sank back onto the couch, her mind reeling. Who would do this? The question wouldn't leave her alone. She grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. There had to be someone who could help her figure this out. Her thumb hovered over Mark's number. He was the last person she wanted to talk to right now, but he was also the only one who could confirm her story. With a deep breath, she pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, and then he answered, his voice smooth and confident. Hey, what's up? Didn't expect to hear from you so soon. Mark, she said, her voice tight. We need to talk. About last night. About the photo. There was a pause on the other end, and when he spoke again, his tone was more serious. What photo? The one someone took of us at the bar, she said, her frustration bubbling over. Jake saw it. He thinks I cheated on him. Someone staged that photo, Mark, and I need to know who. Another pause, longer this time. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost too calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Her stomach twisted. What do you mean you don't know? You were there. We were just talking, but someone made it look like something else. Who would do that? He sighed, and she could almost picture him running a hand through his hair, the way he always did when he was thinking. Listen, he said slowly, I don't know who took that photo, but I do know one thing, it's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. Her jaw tightened. I'm not saying it's your fault. I just need your help to figure this out. If someone's trying to sabotage my marriage, your marriage, he interrupted, his voice sharp now, isn't my problem. You're the one who chose to stay with me in that hotel. You're the one who lied to your husband. Don't put this on me. Her breath caught, his words hitting her like a slap. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had made those choices. She had lied to Jake. But that didn't mean she deserved this. Mark, she said, her voice trembling, please. I just need to know who could have done this. Do you have any idea? Anyone who might want to hurt me? He was silent for a long moment, and then he sighed again. Look, I don't know. But if I were you, I'd start with the people closest to you. Jealousy is a powerful thing. Her mind raced, but before she could respond, he hung up, leaving her with nothing but questions and a sinking feeling in her chest. She set her phone down, her hands shaking. Jealousy. The word echoed in her mind, and then it hit her, Emma. Her best friend, the one who had always been there for her, until recently. Things had been strained between them ever since she started spending more time with Mark at work. Emma had made subtle comments, little digs that she had brushed off at the time. But now, she wasn't so sure. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door, her mind made up. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to stop until she got them. The drive to Emma's house felt like an eternity. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, her heart pounding as she rehearsed what she would say. She pulled into the driveway and marched up to the door, her resolve hardening with every step. She knocked, her patience wearing thin, and a moment later, the door swung open. Emma stood there, her eyes widening in surprise. "Hey, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," she said, her voice cold. Emma hesitated, then stepped aside, letting her in. The living room was exactly as she remembered it, cozy, inviting, but now it felt suffocating. She turned to face Emma, her eyes blazing. "Did you take that photo?" Emma's face went pale, and she shook her head. "What photo?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "The one at the hotel," she said, stepping closer. "Someone staged it, made it look like I was cheating on Jake. And I need to know if it was you." Emma stared at her, her expression a mix of shock and guilt. "You think I would do that? To you?" "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "But things haven't been the same between us lately. And if you're jealous." Emma interrupted, her voice rising. "You think this is about jealousy? This is about you, about the way you've been acting lately. Ever since you started working with Mark, you've changed. You've pulled away from me, from Jake. And now you're accusing me of this?" Her stomach twisted, guilt and anger warring inside her. "I'm not accusing you," she said, though even she could hear the doubt in her voice. "I just need to know the truth." Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I didn't do it," she whispered. "But I can't say I'm surprised someone did." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She stared at Emma, her mind reeling. "What does that mean?" Emma looked away, her voice trembling. "It means you need to take a hard look at yourself. Because if this is happening, maybe there's a reason for it." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Jake's name on the screen. She answered, her voice shaking. "Jake. We need to talk," he said, his tone firm. "Now." She swallowed hard, her mind racing. "I'll be there," she said, and hung up. She turned to Emma, her heart pounding. "I have to go." Emma nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good luck." She left without another word, her heart heavy as she climbed back into her car. She didn't know what Jake wanted to talk about, but she knew one thing: she wasn't ready for this conversation. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob, her breath caught in her throat. What if he doesn't believe me? What if it's too late? She pushed the door open, her heart pounding in her chest. Jake was standing in the living room, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He turned to look at her, and for a moment, there was silence. "I did some digging," he said finally, his voice low. "And I think you're right. That photo was staged." Her heart leapt, but she didn't dare let herself hope. "What did you find?" "A security camera," he said. "From the bar. It shows you and Mark, just talking. Nothing more." Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. "So you believe me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I want to." She stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Jake, I'm sorry. For everything. I should have been honest with you, but I swear, I didn't cheat on you." He looked down, his jaw tightening. "How do I know that?" he asked, his voice breaking. "How do I know this won't happen again?" Her heart ached at the pain in his voice, and she reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. "Because I love you," she said, her voice steady now. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you. He looked up, his eyes locking onto hers, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of hope. But then his expression hardened, and he shook his head. It's not that simple, he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. She opened her mouth to respond, but he cut her off. We need time. Both of us. To figure this out. To see if, he trailed off, his eyes dropping to the floor. Her heart sank, but she nodded, her throat tight. Okay, she whispered. Whatever you need. He turned away, his shoulders tense, and for a moment, she thought he might say something more. But then he walked out, leaving her standing there, her mind